Okay, today we're going to talk about RoboTank Z. Now there are 4 main versions of this. I will put a link in the description box down below to a video that I did showing all 4 versions. And I'll also put a link in the description box down below to an inside look on a repair of a different version. This particular one is a talking version, and not the bump and go. It has the steerable control. We'll get into that. But the link to the one that I have, actually you can kind of see it on the back of here, is a bump and go version with a flashing light up in the head anyway. So I have a link to that. So this particular one, as you can see, these came out, they were made in Japan, late 60s, early 70s. It's very large. As you can see my hand, for a grown-up holding it for a tin toy. Imagine what would have felt in my hands as a kid. It would have been amazing. What was I going to say? We're going to talk about this one at more of how it works than anything else, because it's quite sophisticated. In this particular case, there are actually 4 electric switches used in this toy to make it perform its functions. There are 2 motors that are used. We have a motor down here, down below, that runs a sequencer, it runs a clicker, it runs the light flasher, and it drives the set of wheels. Now the wheels you can manually set if you want it to go in circles or straight. It has a stop and go function where it drives and stops, then the clicking, and these lights flash for the guns, which are on the front of the bodies here. The big clicker is over on this side. It has an unusual electronic sequencer. So there's 2 switches involved here. You can see these 2 leaves and this copper. We'll call it copper. It's probably brass, but whatever. This upper one completes the circuit to the motor that's running this sequencer. So normally speaking, that wiper is touching metal all the time except for the one time, see that little spot right there? Except for the one time when it gets there, then this motor will stop. And at the same time that one is stopped, because the brushes, this upper brush and lower brush are offset, this brush would then be contacting. Normally this brush is not contacting anything. So when this motor turns off, this power goes through, turns this motor on to the record player. Now the record player not only plays the record, but it's also a sequencer, in that when it's done, it completes a circuit to the 4th switch, which is up here, which momentarily puts power back to this sequencer motor, which advances this sequencer drum past that dead spot. The connection that this provides to do that has to be momentary. Obviously it can't be closed all the time, or this would continue to run and go past that point no matter what, and it wouldn't stop. You also notice in here on the top of these, there's some interesting little ramps and bumps on this. See those? And there's a bar of metal. Maybe we can see it better from this side. This same bar right here, if you kind of follow that back in there, it tucks in between 2 axle shafts, and the top of it rests on these bumps as they come around. And that raise and lowers, let's go back to this side, maybe, raise and lowers this gear right here. You see me moving a little bit with my finger? And when that gear is raised all the way up, that brings power over to this little gear here, which brings power down to the wheels. When this drops down, it brings power to this cam right here, which runs the clicker, comes around, hits the clicker and makes that click. And it also, when it's down, you've got right in there, see that post piece? Another switch there. So I guess actually there's 5 switches in this thing. And that switch is what causes the lights to flash. Okay, now we're going to get into the real complicated part of this. It's the record player. Now actually, I'll say before we get too much further into this, this toy was sent to me because it wasn't doing anything. And the main reason it wasn't doing anything was that this red wire from the switch to the battery box, this is the battery box, there's 2 D cells in there. The negative side of the D cells here is soldered right to the frame. And this is the positive side, which goes to the switch. Well, there was, from the factory, one little teeny point of solder on there. Now I have cleaned that, and now it's a very big point of solder. So eventually the wire just fell off, wasn't making a connection. So once I put that on, that got the lower motor running, but there was still an issue. Before I even opened this toy up to work on it, I could tell that it had been worked on before, because these tabs, which you can see here, all the way around here, they had been bent. They weren't in a factory bent position. So they come down and they poke through these tab holes here. And normally from the factory, not only when they come through to would they be bent over, but they would be tucked in. These were just bent over. So I knew someone had been in here before. And then when I was looking at the record player, and I'll make this clearer to see in a minute, there's a post right there. Someone had glued this little piece of red plastic in there. And I'm going, why would they want to force the stylus not to be able to go all the way back to the beginning of the record? Yes, we have a cat that wants something, but I can't do anything about that right now. So I'm going to take this apart and I'm going to explain how the record player works, how it's actually also a sequencer, and all that good stuff. Now I have one piece of metal already off of the record player. Normally this fits in here, and this is really mainly for shipping. When it fits in, it would assure that no matter how hard this thing got dropped or kicked, that this sounding board, which pivots here and here, wouldn't be able to pop off and get lost in shipping or anything like that. Now there's a piece of metal right here, and the more you tighten that screw, the harder it pushes down on this sounding board, applies pressure, and I'll show you how that works, but we got to take it off in order for me to make any of this make sense to you guys. And I'll show you these bits and pieces here. Okay. This is the little spring piece that I was talking about. Let's set that over here. This is the sounder, and it's just a plastic cone, but it actually makes things louder than heck. Now the stylus, which runs on the record, just pushes against this, and when the stylus moves from the outside to the inside, it drags along here. Or the needle, if you don't want to call it a stylus, because it really is just a needle. So what we're talking about here, this is the needle, and you can see it's got a spring here. It's spring loaded. It wants to always return back out. When it's playing on the record, it works, it plays in towards the center. Now it's also lifted up by design from the record. It's not touching the record now. As you can see, when I push on this, you can push it down. It wants to be up on its own. So that's important, and I'll tell you why in a second. That weird little piece of red plastic that I showed you earlier, this little chunk of plastic here, you can kind of see some residue there. That was glued in right there to form a stop, so the needle normally, which would come all the way back and hit this stop, couldn't. They were making it stop sooner. And the only reason I could think anyone would do that is because the record's damaged, and if the needle starts clearing on the outside groove, it won't advance forward. It would keep skipping, and that's exactly what that was there for. So I 3D printed this gray piece here with a screw and screwed it into the housing, and that way I can adjust the screw exactly rather than having just a piece of plastic glued in there, which there's no adjustment. I can find where the record works and set that point. Now as this plays, this piece here, when it's in place, it pushes down against the top of this needle. It applies the pressure to that needle, which then follows the grooves on the record in. And as it goes in, it plays until it gets almost all the way to the inside. And see those two pieces of metal touching? Those are the ones that will then bring power back down to this lower sequencer motor like I talked about. Because remember, when this record is playing, it's in that stop mode where this motor is no longer running, but only this motor is running. Another reason I know somebody was in here is there's felt pen markings on top here, and there was glue back here where somebody glued this thing back together. Anyway, let's get back to this. So as the record plays in, the needle will push this lever, touch those two contacts together. That starts the lower sequencer motor running again. So this will start advancing, which means the motor here will start getting its power from there, and the record player motor here will no longer get any power at all. So that's what's going on there. But something has to reset it, because if it just came all the way in here and stopped at that point, the motor down below would always just keep running. It would never stop because the switches are touching. So something has to reset it to this point where the needle moves all the way out and the switch opens up. And how they do that, you see that little ridge right there? It's right on there. Well, this lever, which is being pushed by the needle lever, you can see how that works its way in when it's towards the inside of the record. That's right there. So as that little ridge comes around, it'll hit this. This piece, which is normally in that position, can get lifted up. You see, it's got a bump on it. It rubs on this bottom side of this sounder as well. Remember, this sounder is being spring-loaded down with pressure by this lever here. So as that comes around and that little hump comes around, that kicks this up, which lifts the red sounder up. And when the red sounder gets lifted up, the natural position of this springs all the way forward, so that opens the contacts up again. So there you go. It's not just a record player, it's also a sequencer for the power for the switch. Whew, that's a lot to say. Now, you do have to adjust the spring tension on this just right. Too little, and the needle won't run in the groove and play. It'll just sit there and skip. Too much, and the belt that drives the record, there's a belt that comes from that and comes down to the shaft of this motor, which is down in here, will just sit there and slip because the needle's digging into the record too hard. So you have to adjust this little piece of metal just right to where it'll do both things. You can see there is a hole right there that the screw goes in, and the back side of this metal is held up. So the more you tighten it, the more it wants to nosedive down in and apply pressure. So let's put this in here. Like so. Okay. Now I have no idea whether that's enough pressure or not enough pressure. It's just the first random place I put it. We're going to run this a few times so you guys can see some of the sequencing. So let's turn it on. We'll see this sequencer turning. I'll move it around so maybe we can see. Right now it should be going into where these wheels are being driven. Okay. Sequencer's coming around. There it is. Watch the arm go up and down as it hits those bumps in there. Saw the gears drop down on their being raised back up. You see when the clicker comes around. And those of you who might be saying, hey, I can't understand anything the record's saying. That's because it's in Japanese. And it's not starting at the very beginning of the record either. I'll put a link also in the description box down below to the website Alphadrome, where the what the record is saying is written out in English. So if you want to hear what the whole spiel was, you can read it, or maybe I'll even just copy that text and put it in the description box down below besides the link. So there you have it. You can see this body is going to fit on top here, on top of all of that. These posts come up through these slots, then these hands will sit over the posts, so as it's moving, the arms are just going back and forth like crazy. There's a couple of caps that get pressed on the top of those posts to assure that the arms stay attached to that. Now, one shortcut that they did take on this particular model is there's no light inside for this cool dome, and there's no light for the eyes. In fact, there aren't even holes in the metal for the eyes. Now, the 4 versions, if you watch the video that I did on the 4 versions, you'll see that there are versions where the eyes are lit and there's a cool spinning light effect in the top of the head. So if you want to see the complete video of this thing put back together and working, just watch that video where I show all 4 of them. I think it's one of the first ones I show, either the first or the second. And then you'll get to see it. Should I try to put it together right now? I just don't know. I don't know if I want to. I don't think any of it could be seen on camera because it's so big I need to hold it in my lap. So all you'd be hearing is metal rattling and crunching around. Maybe I'll do a really short video after this just showing it all back together. You know, it's a quick 30-second video or something. So stay tuned for the part 2 of it back together demo.